I'm slightly less optimistic than Warren is. I think the best road ahead to human happiness is to expect less. I think it's going to get tougher, and I think the solution of having a huge proportion of the young and brilliant people all go into wealth management is a crazy development in terms of its natural consequences for American civilization. We don't need as many wealth managers as we have.
Charlie was born on January 1st, 1924, and you'd hate to go back to that, wouldn't you, Charlie?
Yes, I would, and I like more wealth managers who are just merely reflecting the fact there's more wealth. But I don't like everybody going into wealth management right out of MIT or something. I think the world's a little crazy now.
I mean, we're such a young country. When you think about Japan and you think about the United States, it's just incredible how new we are to the block. I mean, what are we, 234 years old since we started? That's nothing. I mean, Charlie and I combined are we've lived 2/3 of the life of the country. So, and I mean, it really has. I mean, we've been tested at 46 national elections, and we made some bad choices, and we've had a civil war. I mean, so the country has had enormous advantages, though, in some way, because we started with 0.5% of the world's population in 1790, and we now have something close to 25% of the world's GDP. And it wasn't because we had some incredible advantage in terms of land. It was nice to have two oceans on each side back when people tried to rule the world by ruling the waves. But and we had good neighbors in Canada and Mexico, but it's a miracle. And you say, how do we keep the good parts of the system while calling out our obvious defects? And we do it in a very herky-jerky manner. But net, the United States is a better place to live than it was when I was born by a huge factor. I mean, I just got a root canal a week ago, and I was just thinking, I don't know who even invented Novocaine, but I'm for him. I mean, but in a million ways. I mean, you can romanticize about the past, but forget it. It has worked, but now we do have an atom bomb, and we wish nuclear power. We wish the atom had never been split, but it has been, and you can't put it back in the bottle. So the challenges are huge. Our government always looks. My dad was in Congress back in the 1940s, and it looked like a mess then, although it was unified by the war to some degree, but it was still very partisan. Now, the problem we have, I think, is that partisanship, it seems to me, has moved toward tribalism, and tribalism just doesn't work as well. I mean, when it gets to tribalism, you don't even hear the other side, and tribalism can lead to mobs. I mean, it flows. I mean, you've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it to a degree here. So we have to refine in a certain way our democracy as we go along. We deal with the world we live in. But if I still had a choice of any place to be born in the world, I'd want to be born in the United States, and I'd want to be born today. I mean, it is a better world than we've ever had, and with present-day communications, we can also see much more how terrible it is in many ways. And it's got problems. When I was born in 1930, there were 2 billion people in the world, and now there's maybe 7.7 billion and growing. And we went millennia with really no change in population. So and of course, we've introduced energy into, in an incredible way, into something where we now have 7.7 billion people using way more energy than they did when I was born, when there were 2 billion people. So it's an exciting world. It's a challenging world, and I don't know the solutions on things. I do think that we do need to think about different solutions in terms of how we get important problems solved, and that we don't kid ourselves that something magic will happen, or that everybody will get together and we'll all just cheer and it'll go away by 2050 or anything. And how well we adapt to that, we will see. I would say so far it doesn't look very promising, but then I'm sure that when Lincoln looked at it, what was going on in the Civil War didn't look very promising either. So I think that the U.S. is capable of doing remarkable things, and I think it wouldn't surprise me if they do it again.
One of the reasons that we are all here is that you're great storytellers, and we carry those stories back home with us. Can you please share a couple stories that maybe we haven't heard before?
I'll start out with the Jeep. He walked into the office in 1986, and I'd gotten the bright idea of going into the reinsurance business, I think in maybe 1969. So I'd stumbled along for 17 years, and I had a wonderful guy that ran it, but he also liked certain brokers, and I mean, he was running it the traditional way, the top quality and everything else, but he fell into he didn't try and change the system. He tried to improve the system, and to some degree, and we went nowhere. 17 years wandering around in the wilderness, and I thought I knew we could have something good. And then Ajit came in on a Saturday, and Mike Goldberg had steered him in, I think, and Mike deserves to be enshrined in perpetuity for that act. And I talked with him a while. I think maybe I was opening the mail on Saturday while I talked with him, and he had absolutely zero experience with insurance, but he'd actually seen a good bit of how corporate America operated because he'd been in management consulting. And after talking with him, I knew I'd struck gold, and so I hired him and gave him the backing of some money. And we had a very good period in the market, almost right away for him to act. And Ajit, if I had the top pick of 10 insurance managers in the world, I could take all 10, and they wouldn't. You can't replace Ajit. And we still enjoy talking. We don't talk as frequently as we used to, but we used to talk about every day. But he's one of a kind, and if they're going to stick around long enough, you only need one of a kind. Paul Andrews stuck around at TTI, had all the money in the world. Every time I talked to him about getting a raise or something of the sort, he said, "We'll talk about that next year." He was not what you get when you get the top draft picks from the leading business schools. And I will say this, I have never looked at where anybody went to school in terms of hiring. I mean, I just, somebody mailed me a resume or something, I don't care where they went to school. And it just so happens that Ajit went to some pretty good schools, but he isn't Ajit because he went to the schools. And Charlie, you can tell a story or two. How'd you find Louis Vincenti?
Well, he was there.
But you got to recognize him.
I asked Louis once how he managed to play first-string football at, I think, Stanford, when he only weighed 165 pounds. And he said, well, I was pretty quick. And he was pretty quick. We have found a lot of people within our companies who are pretty quick.
Most of the time, companies need to choose between short-term profits and long-term defensibility. For example, Amazon was focused on building their famous Amazon flywheel with limited profits initially in order to obtain stronger network effects with the hope of getting more defensible profits in the future. When you invest, you constantly speak about the importance of building competitive moats. What advice would you give to CEOs about how to balance this dilemma, which is essentially short-term profits versus long-term defensibility? Thank you.
Well, the answer is to control your destiny, which we've been able to do at Berkshire. So we feel no pressure from Wall Street. We don't have investor calls. We don't have to make promises. We get a chance to make our own mistakes and occasionally find something that works well. But we recognize that the people in this room and people like them are the ones that we're working for, and we're not working for a bunch of people that care about whether we meet the quarter estimate or anything. So we have a freedom that we get to use, and we're interested in owning a wonderful business forever. Well, there aren't very many wonderful businesses, but we do learn a lot as we go along. Charlie and I have often mentioned how we learned so much when we bought See's Candy, which we did. But we learned when we bought Ben Rogers' chain of women's dress shops spread all over the eastern part of the country. We learned when we tried getting into the department store business back in 1966, and as the ink was drying on our purchase price, we realized we'd done something dumb. We're learning all the time how consumers behave. I'm not going to be able to learn the technical aspects of businesses, but that'd be nice if I knew it, but it isn't essential. And we are obviously we've got a business at Apple which is larger than our energy business, and we may only own 5.6 or 7%, but our ownership goes up every year. And I don't understand the phone at all, but I do understand consumer behavior. And I know how people think about whether to buy a second car. I know how they go out to different. We own auto dealerships. We're learning all the time from all of our businesses how people react to granimals versus selling them something else. And so See's was a sort of breakthrough, but we just keep learning as to more about how people behave and how a good business can turn into a bad business, and how some good businesses can maintain their competitive advantage over time. So we don't have some formula. Berkshire people, but we can also tell in 10 seconds whether it's something of interest. I mean, when I get these calls and we want to send decks and all that sort of thing, which is nonsense. I mean, it's a bunch of guys sitting that get paid for drawing up these projections of the future and everything like that. If they knew the future, we don't know the future, but we do know certain kinds of businesses. We know what the right price is, and we know what we think we can project out in terms of consumer behavior and consumer and threats to a business, and that's what we've been about, and that's what we'll continue to be about. We don't get smarter over time. We get a little wiser though, following it over time, and you can do it while sitting in the office with a telephone too, which we like.